The Sam Elliott mystery is no longer a rumor, no longer a whisper. It has finally been uncovered, and what it reveals is far more troubling than anyone expected. For decades, Sam Elliott has been Hollywood's last true cowboy, the man whose very presence could silence a room. That deep, gravel-carved voice, that legendary mustache, that unshakable stare that made you believe every word he spoke. 2 generations of fans. He wasn't just an actor, he was the embodiment of the American West itself. A symbol of honesty, grit, and a kind of masculinity the world believes no longer exists. But behind that timeless strength, behind the calm, rugged aura that built his entire legacy, something else has been unfolding. Something hidden, something he never wanted the public to see. And now that the truth is finally out, it paints a very different picture of the man we thought we knew. This isn't just a story about an actor. It's a story about aging, sacrifice, heartbreak, and the painful reality of what happens when a legend carries a burden too heavy for one man to bear. Tonight, we're going behind the mustache, behind the myth, and into the quiet struggle Sam Elliott has kept in the shadows for years. What's finally come to light explains the sudden changes, the rare appearances, the uneasy interviews, and why fans everywhere are asking the same question. What really happened to Sam Elliott? From the moment Sam Elliott first stepped onto a film set in the late 1960s, he carried everything a studio could possibly want in a leading man: an arresting physical presence, a voice carved from gravel and whiskey, and a natural charisma that made even silence feel alive. Directors noticed him immediately. Camera operators whispered that he didn't need choreography. The lens simply loved him. And yet, with every audition, every callback, every minor role that led nowhere, Sam collided with the same immovable wall. Hollywood didn't want him. Not yet. Not like this. He was too Western, too rugged, too masculine, too old-fashioned, too real. While countless young, polished, interchangeable actors rose through the ranks, Sam was told to wait, and wait, and wait. His look, what would later make him a legend, was seen as a liability in an era chasing clean-cut leading men in plastic glamour. As one casting director admitted years later, we didn't know what to do with him. He wasn't the new Hollywood. He was timeless, and we didn't have the vision for that. Instead of crafting roles around his abilities, the system boxed him into tiny corners. He became the cowboy in the background, the ranch hand with one line, the rugged stranger at the bar, roles that reminded him what he could be, but never let him become it. And each time he was passed over, each time a younger, less talented actor was handed a part he deserved, the wound deepened. Not because Sam lacked confidence, he knew what he brought, but because Hollywood refused to see past its own narrow categories. He watched the industry change, trends shift, genres explode, yet the door never opened. For more than 4 decades, Sam Elliott carried the weight of repeated rejection with quiet dignity, showing up to work, doing every role with authenticity, refusing to compromise who he was. The tragedy wasn't that he failed. The tragedy was that Hollywood did. They had a leading man standing right in front of them. But it took the world nearly half a century to realize it, and by the time they finally embraced him, Sam Elliott had already lived a career defined not by opportunity, but by the resilience required to survive its absence. For decades, the very traits that now make Sam Elliott a legend, his slow thunder of a voice, his old-world masculinity, his unpolished authenticity, were the same traits Hollywood treated as flaws. Casting directors whispered excuses that sounded professional but were really coded rejections. To Western, to serious, to deep-voiced. What they meant was simple: Sam Elliott didn't fit the mold. He wasn't a clean-cut poster boy, he wasn't smooth or malleable, and he wasn't the kind of man a studio could repackage into whatever trend was selling that year. From the moment he delivered that brief but unforgettable appearance in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid in 1969, producers could only see him as the cowboy, a background presence rather than a leading force. Film historian Robert Thompson called it one of the great misreadings of talent, a blindness that trapped Elliott inside roles far smaller than the depth he carried. While studios handed starring parts to younger, flashier actors, many of whom have since faded into obscurity, Elliott was left circling the edges of the screen, relegated to supporting roles despite having a presence that eclipsed every room he walked into. His performances in Lifeguard 1976, The Legacy 1979, and especially Mask 1985 revealed range, vulnerability, and quiet power that should have marked him as a top-tier leading man. Instead, Hollywood shrugged and looked the other way. Directors who worked with him in the 90s later admitted, almost shamefully, they wanted Sam in the background, not at the center, because the truth was uncomfortable whenever Elliott did appear on screen. Even in the smallest roles, he stole the movie. And that scared executives who didn't understand how to market someone who felt more real than the carefully manufactured stars of the era. The result was a career defined by missed opportunities, decades of supporting parts, and a staggering delay in recognition. Sam Elliott didn't receive true industry respect until A Star Is Born 2018 earned him his first Oscar nomination at age 74. By then, the industry suddenly praised the same rugged authenticity they once considered a liability. But the question remains, why did it take half a century for Hollywood to see what audiences saw immediately? The man they once dismissed as too Western turned out to be one of the last true originals in an industry that no longer remembers how to recognize one. Tragedy of Sam Elliott's career isn't just the decades of miscasting, rejection, and underestimation, it's the timing of his long overdue recognition, arriving so late that Hollywood had already squandered the very years when he could have defined an era. For nearly half a century, an actor with world-class gravitas was pushed into second-tier roles while far less skilled performers became household names. Film critic Michael Barnes summed it up brutally: he was better than most of the leads he supported, and he was time after time. In the 1980s and 90s, Elliott delivered unforgettable turns in Mask, Roadhouse, and Tombstone, yet the industry continued treating him not as the star he clearly was, but as a reliable accessory, someone who would elevate a film without ever being allowed to carry it. Year after year, he played men of depth, pain, loyalty, and quiet heroism, roles that should have launched him into the stratosphere. Instead, he watched younger, flashier, and often far less talented actors grab the magazine covers, the studio deals, and the multi-million-dollar contracts. By the time Hollywood finally decided to appreciate Sam Elliott, he was already in his 70s. When A Star Is Born earned him his first Oscar nomination in 2019, his reaction, "It's about time," wasn't arrogance. It was decades of dignity bursting through a single moment of honesty. His late career renaissance with films like Grandma, The Hero, and ultimately A Star Is Born felt like vindication, but also like an indictment of an industry that failed to see the obvious. Casting director Margaret Wilson put it bluntly: Hollywood didn't want what Sam was until he was old enough to be someone's grandfather. The cruel irony is that Elliott knew it, felt it, carried it. In a 2015 interview, he admitted with quiet resignation, "I've spent my whole life playing the guy who supports the lead. That's been my hand." Beneath that modest phrasing lived decades of frustration, an actor fully aware that his talent had been undervalued, his potential squandered, and his prime sacrificed to an industry too shallow to recognize the greatness standing right in front of them. The emotional weight of Sam Elliott's delayed recognition becomes painfully clear in his reaction to his Oscar nomination, a moment that should have been pure triumph, yet instead carried the heaviness of 4 decades spent in the shadows. When he muttered, "It's about fitting time," it wasn't sarcasm. It was the eruption of years spent watching award season sweep past him, roles slip away, and far less talented actors collect the trophies, magazine covers, and multi-million-dollar contracts he had always deserved. One industry insider summarized the injustice perfectly: he gave Hollywood his entire life, and it ignored him until he was old enough to be someone's grandfather. That single sentence captures the heartbreak of a career defined not by failure, but by opportunities withheld. The leading roles he should have owned in the 1980s and 90s, the iconic characters he could have shaped, the films that might have been built around his unique presence never materialized. Instead, those prime years passed him by while studio executives insisted he was too Western, too masculine, too serious, to everything they couldn't control. By the time Hollywood finally woke up, age had already narrowed the range of roles he could play. His recognition came, but it came late enough to sting, late enough to carry bitterness, late enough that it could never give back the decades he spent elevating other people's movies instead of his own. It's a reminder of a brutal truth about Hollywood: talent rarely guarantees opportunity, and opportunity rarely arrives when it's needed most. What makes Elliott's story even more tragic is the life he lived behind the scenes, a life defined by discipline, restraint, and a quiet moral strength that ran directly against the grain of the Hollywood machine. While his peers drowned themselves in cocaine, ego, and scandal during the chaos of the 1970s and 80s, Sam stood apart. Entertainment journalist Thomas Henderson described it bluntly: Sam avoided the drug-fueled madness when cocaine was practically a professional requirement. In an era when careers were built at all-night parties, hotel suites, and smoky back, Elliott kept his head clear, his dignity intact, and his personal life grounded. He married actress Catherine Ross in 1984, built a steady home life, and chose a path of stability instead of spectacle. But in Hollywood, a place where connections matter more than character, his integrity became a liability. While he stayed sober, committed, loyal, and humble, the industry rewarded actors who were wild, unpredictable, and constantly making headlines. A veteran producer put it best: Hollywood embraced chaos and punished stability. Bad behavior kept certain actors relevant. Sam's discipline made him invisible. The very qualities that should have made him a producer's dream: reliability, professionalism, and emotional maturity ended up costing him the network, access, and opportunities that reckless but flashy contemporaries used to catapult themselves into stardom. In a twisted irony, Sam Elliott's downfall wasn't a scandal. It wasn't addiction or ego. It was the fact that he was too grounded, too disciplined, too normal for a town that thrives on extremes. And in the end, the industry that should have celebrated him early instead waited until he had outlived his own era to finally recognize the greatness that had been there all along. Meanwhile, actors who partied their way through the 70s and 80s, men who stumbled onto sets late, unprepared, or high, were somehow rewarded with bigger roles, bigger checks, and bigger publicity. It was one of Hollywood's deepest contradictions. Bad behavior generated noise. Noise generated headlines. Headlines generated opportunity. And Sam Elliott, the one man who actually showed up ready, sober, and committed, was the one the industry quietly ignored. He did everything right and still got left behind. One veteran producer reflected, shaking his head at the memory. That truth burned quietly beneath the surface of Elliott's career. He watched actors with half his discipline and a fraction of his talent ride waves of scandal, chaos, and charisma to leading roles he could have nailed in his sleep. But Sam kept his frustration to himself. He never exploded publicly, never lashed out, never allowed resentment to consume the dignity he guarded more fiercely than any career milestone. Still, the emotional toll was real. Maintaining principles becomes a hard and lonely path when those principles seem to be costing you everything you've worked for. Elliott carried the weight of that contradiction with stoic grace, knowing that in Hollywood, authenticity didn't always translate into success. In fact, sometimes it worked against you. The paradox of Sam Elliott's middle career sits at the heart of his story. His greatest strengths, discipline, professionalism, reliability, became invisible to a system that rewarded spectacle, controversy, and noise. The actors who played the Hollywood game, who courted attention through excess, were the ones given second chances in starring roles. Sam, who kept his head down and his life clean, was often overlooked simply because he didn't create the chaos that kept others in the spotlight. The frustration he must have felt stayed largely unspoken, but those close to him caught glimpses of it in rare, unguarded moments. Small flashes of the anger that comes from realizing you've been penalized for doing everything right. He swallowed that anger, contained it, and kept moving forward. But it left a mark. It always leaves a mark out by the mid-1990s. The consequences of Sam Elliott's integrity became clearer and far more damaging. What happened next wasn't dramatic or public. There were no accusations, no scandals, no headlines. It was quieter than all of that, and far more cruel. Hollywood froze him out. He got blacklisted quietly, confessed an agent who worked with him during that era. Not in the traditional McCarthy sense. There was no formal document, no official ban. It was the modern Hollywood version, whispered through casting rooms and executive meetings where decisions were made behind closed doors. A slowdown of phone calls, roles he should have landed suddenly going to other names, projects that matched him perfectly being recast without explanation, producers speaking to each other in coded phrases like, "He's difficult," or "He's not willing to play ball." Asterisk, asterisk, and what had he done to deserve this? He said no. No to hollow scripts. No to commercialized pseudo-westerns that distorted the history he respected. No to television projects built more on branding than storytelling. Sam Elliott refused to play a cowboy caricature for cheap ratings. He refused to dilute the very genre he had dedicated his life to honoring. And Hollywood did not like that. Studios and networks wanted compliance, not conviction. They wanted actors who would sign without reading the fine print. Elliott was the opposite. He fought for authenticity. He fought for integrity. He fought for the dignity of the Western. And in return, the industry punished him in the most Hollywood way possible by pretending he didn't exist. This period of unofficial blacklisting didn't destroy him, but it narrowed his opportunities drastically. The roles that did come were sparse, often underfunded, and rarely worthy of his abilities. Instead of leading major films in his prime, he was quietly pushed into the margins. Yet even then, he never compromised. He never apologized for wanting better, never surrendered his standards. It was the cost of being Sam Elliott in an industry that rewarded everything he refused to become. Producers labeled him difficult and too proud, noted the agent. But in Hollywood, difficult rarely means reckless or unprofessional. It simply means an actor who refuses to lower their standards, refuses to say yes to garbage scripts, refuses to play along with the corporate formula that churns out mediocrity. Sam Elliott's so-called crime wasn't bad behavior, it was integrity. It was insisting on authenticity in a system that wanted shortcuts. His unwillingness to bend for commercial convenience made him a problem in the eyes of producers who preferred actors they could shape, control, and market without resistance. And so, quietly, his punishment began. His name stopped appearing on short. His phone rang less. His agent sensed the shift before he did as casting rooms began selecting safer, more cooperative options. For nearly a decade, roles dried up, not because of lack of talent or relevance, but because he wouldn't compromise. For nearly 10 years, they boxed him into scrap small roles, voiceover work, uncredited cameos. Observed film historian Robert Thompson. Look at his filmography from 1995 to 2005. You see the proof a man in his prime reduced to fragments. It was a silent professional exile, a punishment delivered without a word. An actor who should have been leading films in his 40s and 50s was instead scattered across minor projects that failed to touch his potential. This era exposes one of Hollywood's oldest truths. Punishment in this industry is subtle, invisible, and effective. If studios can't control youth, they erase you. That is exactly what happened to Sam Elliott. The very qualities that now make him a national treasure, his authenticity, his moral backbone, his refusal to sell out, were the same qualities that made studios quietly turn their backs. Hollywood wanted compliance. Sam offered conviction. They wanted Sam brought strength. They wanted actors who treated scripts as paychecks. Sam treated them as stories worth honoring. And so, as his peers appeared on magazine covers, landed franchise deals, and headlined blockbuster films, Sam Elliott was quietly pushed to the sidelines not because he lacked ability, but because he lacked obedience. It wasn't until the mid-2000s, when a new generation of filmmakers less tied to the producers who had once blackballed him entered the industry, that Elliott's career finally began to thaw. Films like Thank You for Smoking 2005 and The Golden Compass 2007 reminded Hollywood of what they had forgotten, that Sam Elliott wasn't just a voice or a mustache, he was a presence. But even then, he was still cast mostly in supporting roles. The full resurrection of his career would not arrive until the 2010s, when Hollywood's obsession with polished artificial masculinity began to crumble. Suddenly, authenticity became fashionable. Suddenly, audiences wanted grit, sincerity, and emotional truth. And suddenly, Sam Elliott, the man they once viewed as outdated, became the most modern actor in the room. His principles, once a liability, transformed into currency. The same integrity that once got him sidelined was now the very quality that set him apart in an age of plastic performances and digital illusions. They couldn't control him, so they stopped calling, the agent said. That simple sentence explains an era of Sam Elliott's life that nearly broke him professionally, but ultimately built him into the legend he is today. His resilience through that silent blacklisting holding firm to who he was, delivering excellence even when no one was watching, became the backbone of the renaissance that would eventually define him. And then, unexpectedly, one moment broke his decades-long silence and plunged him into the first major controversy of his public life. The Yellowstone era had launched a new Western boom, reshaping public conversations about authenticity in the genre, and suddenly Sam Elliott, long the gatekeeper of the classic Western spirit, found himself face-to-face with a modern Western that he felt strayed from everything he believed the genre stood for. The Power of the Dog was praised worldwide. Critics adored it. Awards bodies celebrated it. But when Sam finally spoke, he didn't hold back. In 2022, on a podcast interview, he openly criticized the film's tone, its aesthetic, its portrayal of masculinity, and even its visual authenticity. He said the movie felt more like a piece of art house fantasy than a real Western, and compared the stylings to cowboys running around in chaps with no shirts on. He found the depiction of ranch life historically inaccurate, stylized, and inauthentic, and in doing so, he stepped directly into a storm he never intended to summon. Almost overnight, social media erupted. Critics accused him of misunderstanding the film. Others labeled him old-fashioned. A few labeled him far worse. Suddenly, the man who had spent 50 years avoiding scandal was trapped in his first public misstep. But what people didn't understand was this. Sam Elliott wasn't attacking a film. He was defending a world he had carried on his shoulders for half a century. The West wasn't just a genre to him, it was a legacy, a culture, a code of honor, something Hollywood had trivialized and distorted countless times. So when he saw something he believed betrayed that authenticity, he spoke from a place of deep conviction, not malice. In the aftermath, Sam apologized not because he changed his mind, but because he never intended to disrespect the filmmakers personally. His apology was quiet, heartfelt, and as always, honest. But the controversy revealed something deeper. Even after all these years, even after all the pain and the struggle, Sam Elliott remained what he had always been, a man of unfiltered truth in an industry built on pretty lies. Sam Elliott's critique of The Power of the Dog wasn't just the opinion of a veteran actor, it was the voice of a man shaped by the world the film tried to reinterpret. A man who spent 5 decades breathing life into Western characters because he actually understood the culture, the grit, and the quiet code behind them. But in 2022, when he spoke from that lived experience, the backlash hit like a stampede. His words, raw, blunt, unpolished, collided with a Hollywood that no longer tolerates the sensibilities he grew up with. Within hours, he was labeled outdated, misogynistic, and even homophobic. Social media turned him into a villain. Critics dissected every sentence. Cast members and the director responded publicly. And suddenly Sam Elliott, one of the most respected men in Hollywood, found himself in a storm he had never invited. What made the moment so striking is that it wasn't born from malice. It was born from authenticity. Elliott wasn't attacking the film's themes so much as defending the soul of the genre he helped keep alive. His frustration came from watching a New Zealand director reshape the mythology of the American West into something he felt belonged more to academia than reality. It was a clash of generations, values, and visions, and Sam fell squarely into the crossfire. His apology, delivered during a promotional panel for 1883, was sincere and quiet. He said he never intended to hurt anyone, that art is subjective, that every filmmaker has the right to tell a story their own way. But the apology didn't erase the wound. The damage was already done. For the first time in his long career, Sam Elliott watched his name become ammunition in a cultural war he never wanted to fight. And in that moment, the truth became undeniable. The industry he spent a lifetime respecting had evolved into something foreign, a landscape where honesty is dangerous, where decades of experience can be dismissed with a headline, and where one slip of candor can overshadow half a century of dignity. For Sam Elliott, the controversy was more than a PR misstep. It was a reminder that Hollywood had changed, and that the code he lived by, the code of honor, authenticity, and unfiltered truth, no longer fit the new rules. Yet even in the chaos, the world saw something important. They saw a man who wasn't speaking from ego or hatred, but from love for a genre that shaped him. A man whose connection to the American West runs deeper than scripts, trends, or studio expectations. A man who, even after 50 years, still carries the old values with a stubborn pride. In the end, his misstep revealed more about the era we live in than about the man himself. It exposed the clash between tradition and modernity, between personal truth and public scrutiny, and it reminded audiences that Sam Elliott isn't just an actor, he is a relic of a fading world, a living embodiment of a time when men spoke plainly, stood firmly, and lived by the weight of their own words. His legacy, like the West he defends, is complicated, rugged, and deeply human, and maybe that's why millions still stand by him, because even when he stumbles, Sam Elliott remains what Hollywood can no longer manufacture.